But the way I like to work with metaphor in groups is to take it out of the context of sort of what we may have experienced in school, and more in the context of how we naturally communicate as human beings. Speaking in metaphor is one of those things that we human beings, kind of naturally do, particularly when we're not particularly thinking about it. And I remember working in a kind of a challenging urban environment in Washington, D.C., and this young man was describing to me how he was, how he didn't have any money. He says, "My pockets are lint free," which means, totally empty. And I remember working once with a group of young women in a prison facility when I first started using the arts and working with groups of young people. And my objective was to get them in a space of doing creative writing. So I gave them each a journal, and they created a visual art piece to put on the cover of their journal to kind of personalize it. And this one young woman drew this pencil drawing. It's very simple but very striking image. And it was a very nicely drawn feather in this swirl of clouds. And so I just asked her to comment on it. I said, "That's a really powerful image. What does that mean for you?" And she says, "Well, I guess it's a feather because I'm Native American, and this is my heritage. And this is a feather in a windstorm." Because I'd asked them to come up with an image for their life, how their life felt to them. And that was her metaphor. It was like, I'm a feather in a windstorm. And right there you got is a very clear example of the power of metaphorical thinking or metaphorical speaking, because it has so much more impact to say, "Man, I'm a feather in a windstorm," than it does to say, "I'm experiencing an extreme lack of control and groundedness in my life." So when we speak metaphorically, it kind of speaks directly. It's a kind of language that we humans do that connects the head and the heart in a way that we can feel and understand. And so some other examples from some of those young people in that neighborhood in Washington, D.C. This one young man who had the most cheerful personality I'd ever encountered. Every day he would come into the space where we were meeting, and he'd have a new dance or a new walk when he came in. And he was just a very cheerful person. And so I asked everyone in the group for a metaphor for how their life felt to them at that period in their life. And he said, "Inside is a stadium full of thousands of people ready to cheer," which is exactly how his energy felt. Another young woman who just had so much energy said, "I'm in 5th gear and the parking brake is on." Yeah, so you can feel it. Another young man said, "I'm a traffic light that never turns red." So when we look for metaphors, we look to our environment, And so I'm going to ask you now to come up with a metaphor which describes you as, let's stick with the theme that we were working this morning, and we're going to work it in a new way. I'd like you to come up with a metaphor that describes, in some way, your relationship to your creativity. And this metaphor doesn't have to say everything all at once. It just has to say something that's true. And what I'm looking for is something 8 or 9 words or less. And if you get stuck, if you can't think of a metaphor, I want you to let your mind just go out into the world of nature, because I feel like nature, the natural world, is a huge repository of metaphors. And so take a few moments, go inside, and ask yourself, if you're not a feather in a windstorm, or a traffic light that never turns red, who are you? And how would you describe yourself as a creative being? How would you describe your relationship to your creativity? Okay? In 8 words or less. Everybody clear? Mm-hmm. So then I just want you to write that down on a piece of paper.